Do you see any intention or anything in like the ordering of the cosmos?
Yeah, so if intent is an interesting question when imposed on the universe. For the longest while, philosophically, people imagined that the universe was some perfect place. Earth was a haven for life, especially human life, and everything is just right for us. And that would leave you thinking that there's some intent to the universe, that the universe is serving our needs. And of course, this is, as you would suspect, very strong in religious philosophies, where the adherents of that particular religion are sure that they are more special than any other religion, or more correct in so doing. When you look at the large-scale universe and you see these structures, what you have to ask yourself is, suppose all the galaxies were exactly equally spaced, rather than in these filaments and structures. Perhaps you'd be asking the same thing. Oh, look at, is there some intent here? Look how beautifully ordered it is. Ask yourself, is there some configuration of the universe where you wouldn't ask that? Because if there isn't, then the question doesn't actually aim towards a unique answer. If anything you see out there looks like it's ordered to you, then the question, you can't ask the question. You have to be able to ask the question such that if it were this other way, you would reject it. Now, the people who said Earth is a haven and all this, the fossil record argues differently. 97.8% of all life that ever existed is now extinct. That's the sign not of a planet that loves its life. That's a sign of a planet that wants it to get the life the hell off.
Right, that's
okay?
the anti-haven. That's
right,
yeah.
Right. We are alive not because, but in spite of it. From tsunamis, earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, droughts, floods. Every year, they kill thousands of people. Thousands.
You're kind of bumming me out, I have to say.
I'm not done. Not to mention asteroid impacts. Took out the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. Earth is in a shooting gallery. You want to say there's intent? Yeah, the intent is to kill us. Okay? There's your intent.
Wow.
So the more you look at the universe, the less clear any purposeful intent there is.
On that upbeat note, we're going to need to.
Wait. You want to upbeat?
Give us
when the asteroid comes.
Yes.
Okay. If we have people who reject the science world, and the asteroid is headed towards us, they will be doing a number of things. Praying, certainly. They'll be running away from the impact point. They'll be buying toilet paper and bottled water. And whereas if you had scientists in your midst and engineers, when the asteroid comes, they say, how can I deflect that? Two completely different outlooks on your fate. So if I'm bumming you out by saying there's disaster that will kill us, I'd like to lift you up again by saying it may be that innovations in science and technology may be the only thing that can save us from ourselves.
You debummed me. That's perfect.
In a free society, a free pluralistic society, where the freedom of the expression of religion is constitutionally protected, which is a fundamental part of why America was so attractive to immigrants from around the world, whose religious differences were not being supported in their hometown. I will never be one to tell you what you should believe or what you should not believe. What I will say is that if you want to say that where we don't understand things, that's where God rests, that's where God operates, the God of the gaps argument, because I get asked that all the time. What was around before the universe? I don't know. Must have been something, God. So they got to stick in God where we're not there yet. And I just say, we got top people working on that. It's a current frontier. We're not there yet. And given the history of the moving frontier, where people had previously said, well, God must be operating, we're long past that. Those explanations have come. And so there's no compelling reason to say God did it and then sort of give up and go on to the next problem. My issue with the God of the gaps is that if you feel that way, you should not be writing the science curriculum of a classroom, okay? That's all, okay? Because if you do, you are undermining the very process of what science is all about. Because the God of the Gaps principle is like it's a philosophy of ignorance, whereas science is a philosophy of discovery. And that's an important distinction between the two. And if you remove that foundation for what builds science, you are undermining the capacity of your culture, of your nation, to compete technologically in the 21st century. So it is not without consequence to have conduct of that way. 1,000 years ago, the intellectual center of the world was Baghdad. Baghdad. Europe was busy disemboweling heretics at the time. Baghdad was open to all thought at the time, between AD 800 and 1100, around there. If you look at the advances that unfolded in that period, in that location, it includes the invention of algebra. Algebra is an Arabic word. Algorithm is an Arabic word. 2/3 of the stars in the night sky that have names have Arabic names. How does that happen? Where did the naming rights come from? It came from the fact that at that time, huge advances in the Middle East, in Baghdad in particular, was unfolded in engineering, mathematics, especially mathematics, astronomy, navigation, physiology. And you say, well, why is that so? If you look at what was going on, they were open to all lines of thought. Jews, Muslims, Christians. There were doubters back then. Today we would call them atheists. They would all come around a table and share ideas. If you have some philosophy that's got holes in it, someone's going to find it. And you're going to challenge you on those ideas. And what happens is the conversation ratchets up. You discard what doesn't work and you keep what does. And when you do that, you make discoveries, and you make discoveries rapidly. And at the time, that period drew to a close. If you read history books, they'll typically describe sort of the sacking of Baghdad. It was a bad time for the city. And they'd say, oh, it all came to an end. However, the Islamic culture rose at other times later. And in those other times, science and engineering discoveries were not a part of it. So he asked, why not? You got the cultural heritage, why doesn't it show up again? And then you got to dig a little deeper from the sacking of Baghdad, and you find out there was a Muslim cleric, Al-Ghazali was his name, who was to Islam what St. Augustine was to Christianity. St. Augustine kind of laid out the rules for how to be a good Christian at the time. A lot of people were practicing it in their own way. He codified it. He was a religious scholar, figured it out according to his own read, told everybody how to behave. There's the book. You follow this, you're a good Christian. Al-Ghazali said, you follow this, you're a good Muslim. In that text included the assertion, which gained influence socially, but then politically, so then it had power of influence. In there was the assertion that mathematics and the manipulation of numbers was the work of the devil. The entire enterprise collapsed and never recovered. It has not recovered since. If you look at the number of Muslims who have won the Nobel Prize in the sciences, it's 1. Number of Jews who have won the Nobel Prize, 1/4 of all Nobel Prizes in science have been won by Jews. How many Muslims in the world? 1.3 billion. How many Jews in the world? 15 million tops. So you look at what effect the culture of discovery and learning can have on what you discover about the natural world. It's extraordinary. So just because you're making discoveries doesn't mean it's forever. And I look at the 20th century in America as a period of great discovery. And then I see forces now operating against it. And then I look at the history of the consequences of this, and I see America just simply fading into insignificance. No, it's not off of a cliff. It's just a slope. And every next day you're a little bit further down on the slope. You barely notice it, right? Until one day you can't see over the hill that you just came from. And then you try to make do with what you have down here. And then you find out it's the rest of the world making the inventions and not you. You're trailing, no longer leading. You're not even abreast with what's going on. You're running behind trying to catch up.
What is your personal religion, or is there any type of God to you? Like, is there a purpose, given that we're just sitting on this speck in the middle of this sea of stars? Humans have created a mythological framework that has often involved some kind of higher spiritual powers. And as
Every human culture has done that.
as that goes away, as we know more and more that, and it seems harder and harder to prove that anything might exist like that, where does that leave us?
On our own, which to my mind is much more responsible than hoping that someone will save us from ourselves so we don't have to make our best efforts to do it ourselves. And if we're wrong, and there is someone who steps in and saves us, okay, that's all right. I'm for that, but we, hedged our bets. It's Pascal's bargain run backwards. I'll say another word. The word God covers an enormous range of different ideas, and you recognize that in the way you phrased the question. Running from an outsized, light-skinned male with a long white beard sitting in a throne in the sky and tallying the fall of every sparrow, for which there is no evidence. To my mind, if anybody has some, I sure would like to see it. To the kind of God that Einstein or Spinoza talked about, which is very close to the sum total of the laws of the universe. Now, it would be crazy to deny that there are laws in the universe, and if that's what you want to call God, then of course God exists. And there are all sorts of other nuances. There is, for example, the deist God that many of the founding fathers of this country believed in, although it is a secret whose name may not be spoken in some circles, a roi fainéant, a do-nothing king, the God who creates the universe and then retires, and to whom praying to is sort of pointless. He's not here. He went somewhere else. He had other things to do. Now, that's also a God. So when you say, do you believe in God? If I say yes or if I say no, you have learned absolutely nothing.
I guess I'm asking you to define yours if you have one.
But why would we use a word so ambiguous that means so many different things?
It gives you freedom to define it.
It gives you freedom to seem to agree with someone else with whom you do not agree. It covers over differences. It makes for social lubrication, but it is not an aid to truth, in my view. And therefore, I think we need much sharper language when we ask these questions.
I think the essence of the scientific method is the willingness to admit you're wrong, the willingness to abandon ideas that don't work, and the essence of religion is not to change anything. The supposed truths are handed down by some revered figure, and then no one is supposed to make any progress beyond that because all the truth is thought to be in hand. My sense is that the scientific way of thinking, questioning, some delicate mix of creative encouragement of new ideas and the most rigorous and skeptical scrutiny of new and old ideas, I think that is the path to the future, not just for science, but for all human institutions. We have to be willing to challenge because we are in desperate need of change.
What is faith? It is belief in the absence of evidence. Now, I don't propose to tell anybody what to believe, but for me, believing when there's no compelling evidence is a mistake. The idea is to withhold belief until there is compelling evidence. And if the universe does not comply with our predispositions, okay, then we have the wrenching obligation to accommodate to the way the universe really is.
So you step forward to say, I deny all religion because I can't see it proved scientifically?
No. You see,
the value of religious experience and the value of reaching for higher experiences.
Let me say, religion deals with history, with poetry, with great literature, with ethics, with morals, including the morality of treating compassionately the least fortunate among us. All of these are things that I endorse wholeheartedly. Where religion gets into trouble is in those cases that it pretends to know something about science. The science in the Bible, for example, was acquired by the Jews from the Babylonians
during the Babylonian captivity of 600 BC. That was the best science on the planet then. But we've learned something since then. Roman Catholicism, Reformed Judaism, most of the mainstream Protestant denominations have no difficulty with the idea that humans have evolved from other creatures, that the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, with the Big Bang. They don't have any trouble with that. The trouble comes with people who are biblical literalists, who believe that the Bible is dictated by the creator of the universe to an unerring stenographer.
And so therefore they...
And has no metaphor or allegory.
And from there they make their political and economic choices, and social choices.
And scientific.
And scientific choices. And scientific. And that's part of your problem with that idea.
Exactly.
It is that because for the wrong reasons we make the wrong choices about science.
That's right. So who is more humble? The scientist who looks at the universe with an open mind and accepts whatever the universe has to teach us, or somebody who says everything in this book must be considered the literal truth, and never mind the fallibility of all the human beings involved in the writing of this book?
There are still those in science who say the exquisite nature of the universe, the exquisite laws of the universe, are evidence of a designer, of a creator. Does that view make sense to you?
It's very tempting. I mean, we want to be thought of as children being cared for by an omnipotent, omniscient, and benevolent creator. I mean, think of all the uncertainties and turmoil and terrors of our life, which would be made less terrifying if this were true. But here, if anywhere, is a case where we must not believe because we want it to be true. Now, if you take a look at Darwin, you see a case where it was so tempting to say, I find a watch. It requires a watchmaker. Watches do not spontaneously self-assemble. And now I find an acorn, or a squid, or a bacterium. It is much more intricately and exquisitely put together than a watch. Here too there must have been a creator. It's very natural. But what Darwin pointed out is that there is a perfectly reasonable process, which is inevitable, which will create enormous, exquisite order out of chaos given enough time. If we thought the universe was only 6,000 years old, there is not enough time and evolution is nonsense. But if, as in fact is now definitively true, the solar system and the Earth are 4.5 billion years old, then there's plenty of time for evolution, and our sense that order means creator is wrong. Finally, you can say, look, you can go back as far as you want, but somehow the stuff of the universe had to come from somewhere, and isn't that what God did? But that's only true if the universe was created. If the universe was always here, if the universe was infinitely old, then there's nothing for a creator to do. Most of us would be surprised to hear that the universe is going to end one day. We expect the universe to go on forever into the future. Why do we have the idea that it doesn't go on forever into the past? I'm not saying I know the answer to this. This is one of the deepest questions. We do not know the answer. We simply have to keep an open mind. All of us, philosophers, scientists, religious people, no one, in fact, knows.
The general picture, however, of a Big Bang followed by an expanding universe is correct. What happened before that? Was the universe devoid of all matter, and then the matter suddenly, somehow created? How did that happen? In many cultures, the customary answer is that God created the universe out of nothing. But if we wish to pursue this question courageously, we must, of course, ask the next question. Where did God come from? If we decide that this is an unanswerable question, why not save a step and conclude that the origin of the universe is an unanswerable question? Or if we say that God always existed, why not save a step and conclude that the universe always existed, that there's no need for a creation, it was always here? These are not easy questions. Cosmology brings us face to face with the deepest mysteries, with questions that were once treated only in religion and myth.
You're out in the meadow and you see an ant climbing up a blade of grass. She climbs and she climbs. If she falls, she gets back on the blade and climbs again. Climbs again, she falls, and she climbs and she climbs and she climbs until she reaches the very top of the blade of grass. And you might wonder, what on earth is the ant doing this for? What benefit accrues to the ant? Is she looking for food? Is she looking for a mate? Is she lost? Is she trying to get home? Wrong answers. In fact, no benefit at all accrues to the ant. Well, then, is this just a fluke? Yes, it's just a fluke. It's a brain fluke, a lancet fluke, Dicrocelium dendriticum, a parasitic little brainworm that has to get into the belly of a cow or a sheep in order to continue its reproductive cycle. What does it do? It commandeers a passing ant, climbs into the ant's brain, and drives it like an all-terrain vehicle up the blade of grass to a position where it is more likely to be eaten by a cow or a sheep. Host manipulation by parasites. Here's another one, sort of fascinating, very similar actually. Toxoplasma gondii is a parasite that infects mice. And in order to continue its life cycle, it has to get, in order to reproduce, it has to get into the belly of a cat. Well, now, what would you do if you were in a mouse and you wanted to get into a cat? You would turn the mouse into Mighty Mouse. Make the mouse bold, fearless, so it runs out in the open. That's what mice do when they are infested with Toxoplasma gondii. They're more likely that way to be eaten by a cat. What we have in these cases, we have a hijacker, the parasite that infects the brain and induces suicidal behavior on behalf of a cause other than one's own genetic fitness. Gosh, that's scary. Does anything like that ever happen to us? Yeah. Well, I want to remind you that the Arabic word Islam means submission. It means surrender of self-interest to the will of Allah. But Islam is not alone. In Christianity, we have the same theme. No other species, only us. We're the ones that can live for an idea, that can die for an idea. It's ideas, not worms, that hijack our brains. These are ideas that can copy themselves, that can make us copy them. Not only rehearsing them in our own brains over and over, but spreading them to our friends and our neighbors and our family, and populating the world with many copies of these ideas.
And it comes back to the point we made earlier about ideas not having human rights, because I think people think when we criticize religion, we're criticizing people who are religious, which couldn't be further from the truth, because we think they're victims too.
Absolutely. I mean, the word Islamophobia is all about that. People think that if you criticize Islam, you're criticizing Muslims. Quite the contrary, they're the primary victims of Islam.
I think one can tell a very great deal about a person, or an institution, or a society, according as to whether it is believed that we, the species, or we, or ourselves as individuals, are present here because of the laws of biology, in particular the laws of evolution by random mutation and natural selection, or whether we're here because of a divine plan. A great deal hinges upon whether or not you subscribe to one or other of those Weltanschauung or worldview. And the subtitle of my book on this subject, which is called God is Not Great, is How Religion Poisons Everything. And sometimes I get taken up on that. People think that I must have said it or put it like that just to get an arresting subtitle as a sort of sales tactic or so forth. They say, what do you mean, really everything? Italian food, tantric sex, chess, what you will. And I say, as a matter of fact, yes, I do mean everything, because I think that the cult of faith and the instinct to worship and to prostrate ourselves, to practice religion, or have it practiced upon us, in other words, is poisonous of everything, because it attacks us in our deepest and most intimate and essential integrity. It says to us, in effect, that we don't have free will, and that we don't have the right to decide for ourselves on what is right. We can't tell a right action. People say to me, not realizing how insulting the question is, how would you have morals if it wasn't for God? How would you know? I pause here just to say, and I think on the campus of a university named for Roger Williams, it'll be readily intelligible why I think that's insulting. One of the reasons, I think, is this. If I'm hearing this from one of the practitioners of organized religion, I'm not going to grant them the assumption that they so readily make in their own favor, that they already know, by being Christian or Muslim or Jewish, more about morality than I do. I mean, shouldn't it be that those who practice organized religion should begin by making a few apologies for themselves on this score? How dare they say that I'm on their turf when we're talking about ethics and morality? It isn't I who mandate things like the mutilation of the genitals of children, for example, which is in all cases a religious commandment. It isn't I who ask for suicide and murder to be fused into one action in the name of God. The suicide murder community is almost exclusively, not absolutely 100%, but very nearly exclusively a God-fearing and faith-based one. How dare the assumption be made that we can't talk about these things without a license from some kind of church?
I've recently in the United States stated that teaching creationism is child abuse, and I think it is. Namely, if you withhold knowledge or you do anything to children that puts them at a competitive disadvantage as adults, it's child abuse. It's mild forms of child abuse, but it's like withholding medicine, withholding knowledge that later on will cause kids to become less competitive, because evolution is the basis of modern biology, and teaching things that are basically lies, even if they're well-intentioned, is child abuse. I mean, it's not that people are doing this to be evil, but they're hurting their children, especially, of course, telling kids they're going to go to hell. That's definitely child abuse. It is inappropriate, and teachers not only should not be doing this, but in fact, if they are, they should be removed, in my opinion, because the purpose of education, as I've often said, is not to validate ignorance, but to overcome it.
Ask yourself common sense. If you were a divine being, say you had an ant colony that you made in your house, would you be offended if those ants didn't pay homage to you 5 times a day? And if they didn't look up to you or didn't recognize your existence, would you destroy them? No, I mean, it just seems so petty. So why should we believe in a hateful, unmerciful, petty, sadomasochistic, homophobic, sexist God? It's just irrational. It's not sensible. There's nothing. And the point is, and I don't want to single out Islam here. And I know I'm offending some people, but the same is true for the God of Moses. If you really believed that the scriptures were literally true, the morals in that book are reprehensible.
Faith is really just believing in something for which you have neither rational arguments nor good evidence. William Clifford, who wrote a very nice essay about faith, using as an analogy a ship owner who was about to send to sea a ship full of immigrants. This ship owner that Clifford imagines is uncertain whether his ship is seaworthy enough to make the long voyage to bring the immigrants to the new land. But he thinks about it and he says, well, look, after all, there's a divine providence. And how could a divine providence allow these good people who are going to establish their futures, men, women, and children even, who are, at least the children, innocent of any sin, how could he allow them to drown on the way to the new world? So I will have faith in God, and I won't bother to inspect the ship to see whether it's seaworthy, because I have faith that it will reach Australia? Well, of course, as I say, we know that some ships did not, and we would fault this ship owner and say, you can't just have faith in that way. You need to check the evidence. You need to look at it. The ship owner's faith would have put lives at risk, and unfortunately, in the real world today, faith also puts lives at risk. In fact, the refusal of the Roman Catholic Church to tolerate the use of condoms, even in regions of sub-Saharan Africa where the risk of contracting HIV/AIDS is extremely high, has undoubtedly not merely put lives at risk, but cost perhaps millions of innocent human lives. We pay a high price for the religious faith of some religious leaders.
Religion is not provided to us by revelation. It doesn't come from the heavens. It doesn't come from the beyond. It doesn't come from the divine. It's man-made. And it shows. It shows very well that religion is created, invented, imposed by a species half a chromosome away from the chimpanzee. It shows, doesn't it?
I'm going to talk to you tonight about belief, specifically the problem of religious belief. Our world has been balkanized into separate moral communities. We have Christians against Muslims, against Jews. The majority of people on this planet at the moment organize their lives around a founding proposition that God wrote one of their books. We have many of these books on hand. They make genuinely incompatible claims about the nature of this universe, about the disposition of certain real estate in the Middle East. We have the marriage of quite literally first century or earlier beliefs, literally Iron Age philosophy, with 21st century destructive technology. This on its face should seem untenable to us.
Every person in this room has more access to information and scientific knowledge and just what is now basic common sense than the authors of the Bible and the Quran. In fact, there's not a person in this room who has ever met a person whose worldview is as narrow, just by the sheer time in which they appeared in history, as the worldviews of Abraham or Moses or Jesus or Muhammad. And until we grapple with that fact and honestly talk about honestly commit ourselves to a 21st century conversation about the possibilities of human well-being, we're just going to be at sea, and we're going to be trying to figure out whether we should pass laws about gay marriage and whether we should ban blasphemy at the UN and whether we should allow newspapers to print cartoons about the Prophet Muhammad. And we're going to just be bewildered by the relentless certainties of people who are obviously lying to themselves. The fact that you have Christians having deep experiences of peace, and you have Muslims, and you have atheists, and you have Buddhists, it proves that there's a deeper principle that should be talked about in a non-sectarian way that is not held hostage by Iron Age literature. The first thing you want to do in the spirit of intellectual honesty is admit ignorance, not claim that you, by closing your eyes, can realize your identity with the entire cosmos and the origin of you go get before the Big Bang with your unguarded intuitions.
The first thing to say up front is just that religious moderation is better than fundamentalism. There's no doubt about that. Religious moderates don't fly planes into buildings. Religious moderates don't organize their lives around apocalyptic prophecy, and that's a very good thing. But religious moderation has some real problems. The first is that it gives cover to fundamentalism. Because religious moderates have made it taboo to criticize faith. They want faith respected. They want the whole project of being religious, being identified as a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, to be respected. That it is impossible to call into question this basic project, the ethical tenability of raising a child to believe he's a Christian as opposed to anything else. And under the cover of this respect, we are now powerless to say the very harsh and necessary things about religious extremism that we need to say, because it is taboo. You have to respect faith. Where else in our discourse do we play by these rules? When was the last time anyone in this room was admonished to respect another person's beliefs about history or geography or engineering or medicine? We do not respect people's beliefs. We evaluate their reasons. If my reasons are good enough, you will helplessly believe what I believe. That is what it is to be a rational human being. Reasons are contagious. If I came on the stage and said that the Holocaust never happened, you would be under no burden whatsoever to respect my beliefs. And we don't respect the beliefs of people who think Elvis is still alive, and the people who make all those crazy pilgrimages to Graceland. These people do not get invited to sit on our boards of directors. They don't become presidents of universities. I mean, that is all well and good, except when you change the subject to God, and then all bets are off. Then the sky's the limit. You can be certain with zero evidence and respected for it. It is taboo to push the conversation into criticism of your beliefs. Or take another belief that really this should just be a curiosity to us until you see its consequences in the world. That the Catholic idea that condom use is somehow immoral. This is a genuinely ludicrous idea. I can assure you that the powers of the human brain are insufficient to provide a good argument for this. But map this onto sub-Saharan Africa, where literally millions, something like 4 million people, die each year from the spread of AIDS. And what you have there are Catholic ministers literally preaching the sinfulness of condom use in villages where the only information about condom use is the representation of the ministry. I mean, it seems to me that the time for respecting beliefs of this sort is long past. This is genocidal stupidity. It is criminal negligence of a sort that we would not tolerate in any other institution. Yet the Vatican cannot be criticized to the degree that it should, because it's the Vatican, and there is a overarching taboo around criticizing religious faith.
Strangely, the reason people rise to the defense of God is not that there's so much evidence that God exists, but that they believe that belief in God is the only intellectual framework for an objective morality. Now, the sense is that without the conviction that moral truths exist, that words like right and wrong and good and evil actually mean something, humanity will just lose its way. That's the fear, and I actually share that fear. I've come to believe that this concern that many religious people have of the erosion of secular morality is not an entirely empty one. Now, I once spoke at an academic meeting on these themes, and I said, as I will say tonight, that once we understand morality in terms of human well-being, we'll be able to make strong claims about which behaviors and ways of life are good for us and which aren't. And I cited as an example the sadism and misogyny of the Taliban as an example of a worldview that was less than perfectly conducive to human flourishing. And after my remarks, I fell into debate with another invited speaker, and this is more or less exactly how our conversation went. She said, "How could you ever say that forcing women to wear burqas is wrong from the point of view of science?" I said, well, because I think it's pretty clear that right and wrong relate to human well-being, and it's just as clear that forcing half the population to live in cloth bags and beating them or killing them when they try to get out is not a way of maximizing human well-being. And she said, well, that's just your opinion. And I said, okay, well, let's make it even easier. Let's say we found a culture that was literally removing the eyeballs of every third child, okay, at birth. Would you then agree that we had found a culture that was not perfectly maximizing human well-being? And she said it would depend on why they were doing it. So after my eyebrows returned from the back of my head, I said, okay, well, let's say they're doing it for religious reasons. Let's say they have a scripture which says every third should walk in darkness, or some such nonsense. Okay. And then she said, well, then you could never say that they were wrong. Okay, and so you should know, I was talking to someone who has a deep background in science and philosophy. She's actually since been appointed to the President's Council on Bioethics. She's one of 13 people advising President Obama on all of the ethical implications of advances in medicine and related science and technology. And she had just delivered a perfectly lucid lecture on the moral implications of neuroscience for the courts. And she was especially concerned that we could be subjecting captured terrorists to lie detection neuroimaging technology. And she viewed this as really an unconscionable violation of cognitive liberty. So on the one hand, her moral scruples were very finely calibrated to recoil from the slightest perceived misstep in ethical terms in our war on terror. And yet she was quite willing to forgive some primitive culture its fondness for removing the eyeballs of children in its religious rituals. And she seemed to me quite terrifyingly detached from the very real suffering of millions of women in Afghanistan at this moment. So I see this double standard as a problem. And strangely, this is precisely the erosion of basic common sense that many religious people are worried about. I hope it'll be clear to you at the end of this hour that religion is not an answer to this problem. Okay, belief in God is not only unnecessary for a universal morality, it is itself a source of moral blindness. People want to be happy. They know the difference between happiness and suffering. They want to feel a part of a community. They want to feel the best they've ever felt and better than they've ever felt. And they constantly notice that life makes that difficult. The beliefs that console us about what happens after death are obviously a response to that circumstance. And one thing people have found to do is tell each other a story that death is an illusion, that we all get together at the right hand of Jesus after we die. That does the trick for a lot of people, and people are mightily attached to that story. But that story is really both in its products and in the way of getting there, the antithesis of the scientific frame of mind. And we just can't conflate them. And we have to notice when we're lying to ourselves and when we're lying to our children. And we have to notice that there's a liability to pretending to know things we don't know.
There's a certain value to the dignity of human life and a hope and a meaning that religion gives that enables people who are in the midst of severe depression and not being able to see up from where it is that they are, that religion can give people a hope or a belief in something outside of themselves when they don't find resources inside of themselves. What meaning can you give to someone who finds no meaning humanly inside himself or from another human being that can somehow help him?
Humans evolved to find purpose in things. Good reason for that. If the leaves are rustling in Africa, you can assume there's no purpose to that, or you can assume there might be a lion behind it. Those people that assumed there was purpose survived and reproduced. And so humans like to find purpose in things. And often, because the world is violent and unfair, find a need to hope that there's something better. And so religion certainly provides that, but that doesn't make it consistent with the world the way it is. Can you find solace, joy, hope without religion? And of course the answer is absolutely yes. I find the fact that the universe wasn't created for us, that doesn't care about what us and what we want or desire, the fact that we're here for a short time and will be gone makes every moment more precious for me. So my joy, hope, spiritual wonderment, which comes from looking at a Hubble Space Telescope picture, comes from the rejection of everything that religion defines. So it's clear that religion offers a utility for people. The question is it the only way to get that? And the answer is no. And I would prefer to get my spiritual fulfillment for something that actually corresponds to reality. If other people find other needs, that's fine with me, but it doesn't make it intellectually consistent.
And religion in that case becomes a way of numbing yourself to escape from your problems with reality. It's a way to gain some comforts within yourself so that you don't really have to face your own meaninglessness in an empty void or whatever your existential feelings are.
So what's wrong with that? Is there something wrong with that if it makes you feel better?
Well, there's nothing to be gained by believing any mistruth, no matter how benign it might be.
I mean, how useful is it that millions of Muslims believe in the metaphysics of martyrdom? How useful is it that the Sunni and the Shia in Iraq have such heartfelt religious differences? How useful is it that so many Jewish settlers think that the creator of the universe promised them a patch of desert on the Mediterranean? How useful has Christianity's anxiety about sex been these last 70 generations? But here's my basic concern. Our ability to cause ourselves harm is now spreading with 21st century efficiency. And yet we are still, to a remarkable degree, drawing our vision of how to live in this world from ancient literature. This marriage of modern technology, destructive technology, and Iron Age philosophy is a bad one for reasons that I think nobody should have to specify, much less argue for. And yet arguing for them has taken up most of my time since September 11th, 2001. That day that 19 pious men showed our pious nation just how socially beneficial religious certainty can be.
The way the universe works is incredibly interesting. In fact, it's spiritual. In fact, the spirituality of science is so much more exciting than the spirituality of religion, and the reason is it's real. It is absolutely true that science and religion don't make similar claims about the natural world, because the scientific claims are right, the religious claims are wrong. They can't be similar. So religion is certainly, and in fact, as St. Augustine would have pointed out, and others, is certainly not, the Bible is not to be read as a book of science. It's a mistake to believe it should be read that way, because after all, it was written before people knew the earth went around the sun. And while it is true that Galileo is celebrated now, we must remember that the church wasn't particularly interested in his science when they excommunicated him. The idea is that there are theologians, and any sensible theologian must accept the universe for the way it is, and they try and it's called apologetics for a reason, to try and make the religious theology consistent with what we know, and what we know is constantly changing. But what we know contradicts virtually everything in the doctrines of the world's organized religions. So as I say, the only thing you have left is to say there's some vague purpose to the universe. And if you want to believe that, that's fine, but that doesn't add anything. And it's certainly not the basis of science. It's not the basis of morality. And it's just a fairy tale.
There is no purpose of life. There is no meaning of life, and that is good news. We shouldn't want there to be a purpose of life or meaning of life, because otherwise that would make us secondary. We would be following marching orders from a commanding officer or a plantation owner over his slaves or some boss, and it would cheapen our lives to think that there was a purpose of life. But to say there's no purpose of life, that there's no ultimate purpose, is not to say that there's no purpose in life. Life is immensely purposeful. We atheists and agnostics, and you believers as well, you have immense purpose in your life, not top down from some orders that are telling you what to do, but bottom up from your own life experiences, trying to solve the problems that come your way, trying to eliminate the harm. Maybe one of your siblings dies of a horrible rare disease. I'm going to dedicate my life to fighting that disease. There's purpose in life, immense purpose, meaningful purpose in our lives, not from up there. That cheapens us. But from our own living selves, struggling to get through and make sense of this world that we're in. You all have it. I have it too. Life is immensely purposeful and meaningful. To say that it's not ultimate doesn't make any difference. Who cares about ultimate purpose? What we care about is people are hurting right now. That's what we care about, is immediate purpose, immediate goals. Life is immensely meaningful. And don't try to denigrate atheists by saying we live these empty, purposeless lives.
Moreover, the notion of cause, which is so central to religion, is potentially irrelevant. Because, for example, if time began with the Big Bang, there was no cause, because cause and effect require a causal relationship. If time began with the Big Bang, then our way of thinking about the universe has to use different concepts. We may not like that, but we're forced to. And certainly the reaction, for example, to my last book, about what we mean by nothing, people object to it because they don't like it. But changing our definition of reality is called learning, and that's what science is all about.
Firstly, religion harms and corrupts our sense of reality. It encourages us to believe implausible and untestable assertions based on faith. And by faith, I mean believing something because you want to believe it disproportionately to the currently best available evidence. But before I get into that, I have some good news for all of you here today. I was talking to Bill Gates of Microsoft earlier today, and he's going to give everybody here $10 million if you vote with me on this motion. Now, clearly, you realize that's an absurd statement. But if I had said to you instead that today I was talking to the creator of the universe, and he told me that he would give each of you an eternity in paradise if you do what I say, then some of you might believe me. Certainly, many people around the world would believe me. And that is because religion corrupts our sense of reality. Because normally when we assess whether or not we believe claims, what we do is we assess them against the evidence. And as the claims become increasingly implausible, we proportionately raise the bar of the evidence that we require to believe it. But with religion, we do the exact opposite. As the claims become increasingly improbable, we lower the bar of evidence that we require to believe it. And we do that because religion encourages us to believe not merely implausible claims, but literally untestable claims. And then it encourages us to live our lives on the basis of these untestable claims. And when you compare that to harmful secular ideologies, which can also fall prey to faith and dogma, such as fascism or communism or the unregulated free market, what you notice is that those faiths and dogmas eventually bump into reality and we notice that they're not working. But religion hides its testability in an imaginary afterlife. However implausible the claim that I made earlier may be about talking to Bill Gates, it is surely infinitely more implausible to suggest that a supreme being created a universe of 1,000 billion galaxies, each of which contains 1,000 billion stars like our sun, in order that it might speak to one member of one species on one planet and tell him to stone a man to death for gathering sticks on the Sabbath, and then impregnate a virgin in order to give birth to himself, and then give Muhammad a ride on a flying horse, and then appear in Joseph Smith's hat in order to attire him in magic underpants. And on the basis of untestable and absurd claims like this, Asia Bibi is today languishing in a prison cell in Pakistan awaiting execution by hanging for allegedly blaspheming Muhammad. Religion corrupts our sense of reality, it corrupts our sense of morality, and those corruptions combine to harm society and cause terrible suffering. I propose the motion.
I submit that if we knew half of what we know now about physics, about biology and astronomy, the Abrahamic religions couldn't be founded in this day. None of them could be founded and believed in by people who knew what we now know. The human species is, let's say, at least 100,000 years old. It's probably much older, maybe 250,000 years. You have to believe this to believe in Abrahamic religion. You have to believe the following, that for, let's call it 100,000 years, humanity is born, doesn't live long, mostly dies in childbirth, dies of its teeth, dies in terrible wars, famines, plagues, dies in fear because it doesn't know why there are volcanoes, doesn't know why there are plagues, doesn't know why there are earthquakes or tsunamis. Fear, misery, shame, terror, cruelty of all kinds. And for the first 97,000 of those years, heaven watches like this. But then after 97,000 years of it decides, we can't let this go on. We'll have to intervene. But only in the most barbaric and backward parts of the Middle East will we show our face to people who can't read, who are terrified, who are ignorant, who live basically with and like animals. Now, I submit that whatever may be the case, whatever is true, whatever may remain to us to find out, and as Socrates says, the great definition of wisdom is having some idea of how ignorant you are, whatever the outcome is, morally, scientifically, or logically, that cannot have been the case. Religion is false. I take my stand. Some people I know who are atheists will say they wish they could believe it. Some people I know who are former believers say they wish they could have their old faith back. They miss it. I don't understand this at all. I think it's an excellent thing that there's no reason to believe in the absurd propositions I just, admittedly rather briefly, rehearsed to you. The main reason for this, I think, is that it is a totalitarian belief. It is the wish to be a slave. It is the desire that there be an unalterable, unchallengeable, tyrannical authority who can convict you of thought crime while you are asleep, who can subject you, who must indeed subject you, to a total surveillance around the clock, every waking and sleeping minute of your life, I say of your life, before you're born, and even worse, and where the real fun begins, after you're dead. A celestial North Korea. Who wants this to be true? Who but a slave desires such a ghastly fate? I've been to North Korea. It has a dead man as its president. Kim Jong-il is only head of the party and head of the army. He's not head of the government or the state. That office belongs to his deceased father, Kim Il-sung. It's a necrocracy, a thanatocracy. It's one short of a trinity, I might add. The son is the reincarnation of the father. It is the most revolting and utter and absolute and heartless tyranny the human species has ever evolved. But at least you can die and leave North Korea. Does the Quran or the Bible offer you that liberty? No. No. The tyranny, the misery, the utter ownership of your entire personality, the smashing of your individuality only begins at the point of death. This is evil. This is a wicked preachment. I don't want anyone to despair. We have a number of consolations. We have our own solidarity, we have love, we have literature, we have our duties to each other. What leads to despair is to live the only life one has, being told what to do by despots and crackpots and pseudoscientists who claim the right to order us around in the name of God. Humanity has to outgrow and transcend that oldest of all the tyrannies. Atheists do not say, we know there is no God. We say, to the contrary, no argument and no evidence has ever been adduced that we consider to be persuasive. There's no reason to believe in evidence or argument, ontology or science. The same with the afterlife. Of course we don't say that we know there isn't one. We say that we don't know anyone who can bring any reason to think that there is. This is a very important distinction, and it's very regrettable that you miss it. And I'm sorry to say, Dinesh, that the immediate loser in an argument about things of which we can and can't be certain, where the only thing that is certain in these laws is the principle of uncertainty, the immediate loser, the man who has to leave the island, sorry Dinesh again, right away almost, is the one who says, I already know all I need to know. I already have all the information I need. Indeed, I've been given it by a supernatural body. I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen, but when I hear people on the bus saying that they're talking to God, well, what do? You move closer to that person, or am I right in thinking you edge slightly away? I think that's a very good thing. There's an excellent reason why the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment was first proposed. It wasn't proposed just by people like myself who wouldn't go any further than deism in their attitude to religion. It was proposed by many people who were quite devout and who thought not just that the government must not be corrupted by religion, but that the churches mustn't be corrupted by the association with the state either. And I think that's an equally morally valid point. James Madison, the co-author of the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom and of the First Amendment and the other things that bodyguard our wonderful Republican secular constitution, didn't think there should be chaplains to open Congress, didn't even think there should be chaplains in the armed forces. If people want to pray in the army, they can. No one can stop them, but we're not going to pay for someone to pray over them. These are very tough questions, but it must be understood that these were part of the very urgent views of the framers and the founding fathers, and it's our responsibility to be discussing this very seriously now at a time when Hillary Clinton's joined some reactionary evangelical organization to try and bolster her faith-based connections. John McCain, a lifelong Episcopalian, has this year, I wonder why, said he's a Baptist. And Senator Obama has been caught in some big-mouthed, sinister, windbag, rock and roll horror show church on the South Side. Religion is poisoning our election and our democratic republic, and it's time that we said enough. If you want to be a fraud and a fundraiser and a shakedown artist and a big mouth and an ethno-racist in this country, try your best. But it's long past time that we said putting reverend in front of your name is not enough of an achievement. They're making supernatural and superhuman and divine claims. They're claiming to know God, what God wants of you, what he wants you to eat, who he wants you to sleep with, in what position, on what days of the week you should eat this or that, what animals you should avoid devouring. They claim to know something that we claim is not knowable. Now, which of those claims is the more plausible? And they don't concede that extraordinary claims involve extraordinary evidence, which is why evidence is such a casual thing with them. However, we do have extraordinary evidence that I laid out earlier of how our cosmos originated and how our DNA has been found to be sequenced. And some of these things are lovely to contemplate, and some of them are rather sobering. But none of them require a God. Now, you reflect again on what I said about the death of a sun every second, about the impending collision of the galaxies, about the rapid expansion rate of the Big Bang, and you ask yourself, I can't tell you this isn't happening without a purpose. I certainly don't have enough knowledge to say that, but I can say with reasonable certainty, I don't think all this was undertaken, this vast creative destruction, so that one primate species on one small planet could hear the Pope telling them that AIDS may be bad, but that condoms are worse. I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, what could be more self-flattering, pathetic, and yes, superstitious than that?